Hello and welcome everybody back to another episode of From the Heart, and this is just going to be kind of a little bonus video. If you have not been able to tell, I did change up the set a little bit. You know, there's a little more space. The bookshelf takes up pretty much the entire shot, so you're not going to be seeing my weird radiators or my old trim of my house and things like that. And hopefully we'll be able to get the cool lighting back. And right now, it's just very well lit. But anyways, everybody, what I wanted to do, and something that I've been doing lately, is kind of forcing myself to actually read real books, alright? Not just comic books and graphic novels, alright? Right here, we have no pictures, we have, you know, no color palettes, it's all just purely text. And it's actually been quite a little bit since I've actually sat down and read an entire book, but the one that I actually chose, and something that I picked out about a year ago, and something that I really only know about if I hadn't stumbled across some awesome horror books of TikTok kind of, you know, video. And I am so glad that I did, because the book that I'd be talking about today would be Last Days by Brian Evenson. And honestly, I think if you are somebody who hasn't sat down and read a book in a long time, and while this thing is very funny and at the same time extremely dark, I actually would highly recommend this thing. I've never really read any Brian Evenson before, but his writing style is something that I've never really quite seen. It's very fast paced. Brian Evenson writes in a style where he doesn't really take too much time to sit and, you know, describe every single little piece of whatever's going on in a room, every single internal emotion of every single character, but he really just cuts right to the point, and it leads to a lot of really dry humor, a lot of scenes where you think they, you know, is this going to take forever to actually get to what's going on in the story, and it just cuts that right away. It gets to the point, it doesn't linger on any situation for too long, and there's even some moments in this where I'm just like, wow, that kind of all transpired just a little faster than what I would have thought. But what this book would happen to be about, and if you're somebody who doesn't want any spoilers, I'm going to try my best not to spoil the entire thing right off the bat, but I'm guessing that by the end of it, I will, you know, be doing so. I did really enjoy this book. It was right up my alley. It was extremely dark and weird and creepy, and it's just something that I absolutely loved. Last Days by Brian Evenson. But what this story would actually be about is actually about a detective who recently had one of his hands cut off. And it was actually cut off by not only a kidnapper, but about halfway through this book it would also mention that this person was, you know, actually his best friend. And it only mentions that for just like 1 second, and then after that it completely drops it. So I don't know if this was some kind of deep cover or not, but where the story will begin is right there. Sitting across the table from this man with a giant butcher knife awaiting his fate. And what he kind of decides that he needs to do is that, you know, he can either get up right now and die immediately, or he can allow this man to cut his hand off, and he can actually reach back to an oven that's conveniently turned on in the background and kind of cauterize this wound and have enough time to grab his gun. And this is exactly what happens. Right off the bat, this man gets his hand cut off, he flings himself to this oven, he sticks his thumb directly on it, and he grabs his gun with his left hand, and he shoots this man square in the eyes. And it's, you know, a really fast start, and it's a really interesting introduction to the kind of writing style of this book, as well as to our main character, Mr. Klein. And where this will kind of land this man is in a bit of a stupor, and a little bit of a depression, just kind of stuck in his apartment, almost not even being able to kind of feed himself or get out of bed or do any of these other things, because, well, you know, what he just did is something very traumatic, and he is a little bit shell-shocked, and eventually he would decide that he's just going to lay there for upwards of 3 days, you know, kind of letting the milk in his glass sit next to him just dry up into a weird curdled skin. And throughout all this trauma, he can even still feel the hand that has been lost. He can feel himself flexing it. But what would begin and what would transpire to kind of send him on his crazy journey through the rest of this book, in the most interesting section of this book, is when he would begin to get a call that would tell him that opportunity is knocking. And who this would actually be is a man named Ramsey and a man named Gus. And while he doesn't know their names yet, they would continue the call over and over again, not really telling this man anything about what they actually want, just kind of letting him know that they need him to come back to their compound, that there is opportunity knocking in a case that only he can solve, and essentially the only reason why they want him to do so. And the thing that they keep bringing up over and over again is that he is like them, alright? He's a 1, he cut off his arm, and this kind of number system is going to be something that will really play out later on, and something that we'll get to very soon. But eventually, Klein would get very much annoyed, and with these phone calls going on, and I forget to mention just, how dry this dialogue is written, and so almost sarcastic and straight to the point that it really is just kind of hilarious. And one of my all-time favorite parts throughout this book is these two characters, Ramsey and Gus. These two ones and a three, and something, like I said, we'll get to later. But after about the third call, Klein would inevitably rip the wire completely out of the wall and, go back into a stupor. And just pretty much lay there in his own stench, kind of feeling sorry for himself, until inevitably he would wake up in the middle of the night with two men walking through his door. Two men completely covered in all black clothes, faces covered up, hands covered up, basically their entire body. There's not really any skin showing. And at this point, Klein has not been feeding himself. He has not been watering himself. He basically has no way of actually defending himself. And on top of this, he doesn't really try. Klein at this point just doesn't really care about what's going on. He just kind of wants to know, why these people are here in the first place. And what these two men would do is continue to tell him that opportunity is knocking. And they would actually pick this man up, bring him to their car, and away they would go out onto the freeway into the place that would, bring Klein's most craziest case that he's probably ever going to be on, and if there isn't a sequel, then that's just gonna be the truth. But once Klein, Gus, and Ramsey do get into this car, Klein would notice something from the back seat, as these two men would begin to kind of twist and turn all their different ligaments, their ears and everything, and they would actually begin to take off all these extremities, their hands, extra fingers, extra toes, actual earlobes and things like that, things that are actually fake to actually cover up what is actually going on with them. And this is where they would start to kind of begin to explain what they're all about, what this group of people that they came from is all about. And what this would actually be is the Brotherhood of Amputation. And this is where, the really gritty parts of the story are going to be laid out in front of you, and this is really where this story absolutely grabbed me, alright? It really cuts to the chase in this book. It really just gets right to the meat and potatoes of everything. It's not like, a 6-hour journey just to get to, the base of the story that you see in a lot of books. And while this isn't a bad thing, I think Brian Evenson's ability to actually write through all this without, making you feel rushed into it, without kind of losing the emotion of what's going on, is something that I absolutely cherish, and I'm ashamed that I've never even heard of this man before. And I'm definitely going to be seeking out more of his books. But with this, Ramsey and Gus will begin to explain that with the Brotherhood of Amputation, essentially one would feel closer to God with, less senses, with less extremities. And why they call this man a 1, why they call Gus a 1, and why they call Ramsey a 3 is because Klein and Gus are both only missing 1 extremity, and Ramsey is actually missing 3. And the top leader of this entire establishment would be a 13. And by the time you actually meet this man, he would literally be nothing other than, and I hate to say it, and I hate to say that it might be a little insensitive, but this man is literally, a chicken nugget of a person who cannot talk, and I'm assuming cannot see, because he has absolutely no legs, no arms, no eyelids, no tongue, no lips, no ears. And I don't even know if that adds up to 13, but somehow it does. And they start kind of having this weird conversation of, if Klein's a 1 and he's missing an entire hand, and Gus is a 1 because he's only missing a finger, wouldn't one be a little more important than the other? And this is kind of just a silly joke that goes out through this entire book, something that kind of sparks debate between some of the people inside of this organization, because nobody can really kind of decide, because a lot of them will get up to high numbers just by taking off, 1 knuckle or 1 finger or 1 toe at a time to kind of raise their ranks without going so utterly drastic. And it's something that feels very gross throughout this entire thing. And by the time they actually get to this compound and they begin to lead Klein into his room for the night before he'll meet one of the top members, you would actually see kind of like a pinup girl calendar, only with each different month there would actually be a new extremity missing from this lady. And yes, this book is extremely dark, and it's very hard to explain, and I'm trying to get through it the best I can, and this book really does move just about that fast, alright? Klein would eventually go to sleep in this room after noticing all these strange, missing limb people and all these kinds of things, and with the next day, he would finally be led to Borchert, the second in command of this compound, and one of the founding fathers of this compound, a man who is missing an entire leg, an entire arm, a bunch of fingers, I believe he's also missing one of his ears, and I want to say this man is about an 11. But what they would actually bring Klein in to do with all this is to tell him that the man Align, the top tier person, and the person that I recently called, a chicken nugget person, has been murdered. And they actually need Klein to solve this. And the only reason that they need him to do it is because he is a self-cauterizer. That this man actually allowed his hand to be cut off, and not only did he not use any medications to kind of keep his pain levels down, but he also shoved his bloody stump on top of a stovetop and cauterized it himself. And this kind of leads everybody in this little village, in this little compound, to be extremely impressed by Klein. And something, it's like, I gotta stop saying the story's dark, alright? You get it, it's dark, it's also very funny, it's something that I could really see being turned into a movie. I think the person who could obviously play Klein would have to be the lead voice actor for the game Observer. I forget what his name is, but I will post I'll add it into the editing so I can show you. I think it's the perfect fit. But yes, Borchardt, a very interesting character, a man who basically talks in riddles and will never actually tell Klein about anything that's even going on in this place, who at some points I don't even know if he knows what's going on, even though, he does know. But on top of all this, and something I totally forget, is that Borchardt for some reason wants to kind of gain some kind of trust with Klein to maybe get him to stop asking any kind of questions and things like that. And he actually has this man cut off one of his knuckle bones to kind of prove to him that, he is about what is going down here at wherever this place is. And Klein kind of thinks to himself, he shouldn't, but he thinks, why the hell not? And he literally, he does it, alright? They get out a little Bunsen burner, Klein grabs a butcher's knife and he cuts it right off, and Borchardt sticks it right on the hot plate to kind of, show him that he's man enough for all this. But nonetheless, eventually Klein would go to Align's room and he would start to look at all these different blood splatters and all these different knife markings and things on the wall, all these different, evidence pieces that would show that Align was killed in this room. But with Klein being an expert detective, and something I know I haven't really conveyed to you, but something that is conveyed throughout, the entirety of the story, Klein would begin to realize that the blood splatters and the blood pool on the floor, that basically nothing lines up. That a man with absolutely no arms and no legs would have no way to even move about the room. And he starts coming to the conclusion that maybe somebody literally picked this man up, started slashing and like dancing and spinning around the room. And it very much so paints a very, dark picture. That is for sure, alright? It is extremely dark throughout the entire thing, but when Klein would look down at the pool of blood, he would actually poke his finger into it and realize that the very top layer is rock solid, but what would lie underneath is gooey, essentially fresh blood. And when he goes back all the way to Borchardt, with people telling him that they won't be able to talk for the next couple of days, Klein would essentially deny this, pretty much begging for answers, absolutely demanding them, and Borchardt would really see no reason, alright? He would actually go on to tell Klein that what does it matter if this man was killed 3 days ago or a month ago? And Klein would kind of tell him that if this man's been dead for over a month, then where the fuck is all this regular blood coming from? And eventually, with Klein realizing that Borchardt isn't going to give this man any sort of nonsensical answer or something that even vaguely makes sense, Klein would demand that he actually gets to talk to the 10 rankings and up and people like that, or maybe Borchardt would say that these are the only people he can actually question. Only how he would be able to question them is he would give him a tape recorder, have Klein actually say the questions that he wants, and then Borchardt would deliver this to each and every one of them and bring this back. And Klein has a huge problem with this. And throughout this entire story, it's pretty much painted that, Borchardt just isn't going to let anything go. He's never really going to tell anything that's actually going on. And it's a very fascinating premise for what's going on, because what would happen next is when Klein would actually get this tape recorder back, all the answers from all the top ranking people would essentially have words cut in and out. Things like, did you murder Align? Do you know who murdered Align? Were you there the night that he was dead? Have you seen him dead? All these different things, all these different questions, and the most crucial parts of the answers that all these different amputees would essentially give him be snipped out, be jumbled around, and this leads leaves Klein to only be more and more, pissed off. And from this point on, Klein would essentially know that nobody in this room could possibly ever be trusted, that there's essentially nothing that this man's going to do to actually get some real answers, and by the end of it, he just kind of wants to leave, only Borchardt would let him know that this isn't even possible, that if he's going to leave, that he's going to have to leave off to heaven, that he will straight up kill this man if he doesn't either complete the investigation or just outright join them. And I just want to say before I get any farther throughout this, I'm missing a ton of context, a ton of really interesting situations, and if you're somebody at all who is kind of looking for a good book to sit down and read, something kind of fast and something that's not too overwhelmingly huge, I very highly recommend this. Like I said, I've been blowing over some very good parts of this story. I actually read this about maybe a couple weeks ago, and I'm finally getting down to sit and talk about this thing, and it's a book that I really loved, alright? There's another book that I'm reading right now, and it sucks. Alright, it's nowhere near as good as this thing, but I'm definitely going to be doing a video on that one when I force myself to finish. But yes, everybody, definitely pick this up. But from here on out, we're basically going to get to see the inner workings of this cult. There's a part where Klein would actually go to a party with everybody there and actually get to see where these operations take place, where people get their amputations and become a higher ranking part of the situation. People like Gus that we see in the first place, who would basically become a 3 at this party, taking some anesthetic, and essentially Klein would be forced to watch this man have 2 more fingers cut off, with Gus actually making the mark on his hand for this to happen. And this is a part where Klein begins to be, completely and utterly disgusted about this. At this party, there also features, a striptease woman who, instead of taking off her clothes, would begin to take off various different prosthetic limbs and things like this, and it all manages to be, like I said, so funny and so completely dark. And honestly, there's just so much that goes on in this book at such a fast pace that it's pretty hard to kind of regurgitate all this to all of you. But eventually, after some very huge events and things that I don't want to completely spoil, Klein would leave, alright? He would find his way of escape, heading back down all these different back roads and essentially back to the place he started, back at his apartment, until inevitably more of these cult members would come after him and begin to pretty much kill anybody in their way to get this man, alright? This also involves a bunch of different police officers that are featured very heavily through this book, a man named Frank, and a whole bunch of other people that would basically almost die in the process of all of this. And eventually, and pretty much all of this would lead to the second act of this book. And I know I'm speeding through this thing, and like I said, you do need to kind of read this for yourself. Yes, we would come to the Brotherhood of Pauls, and who would actually be one of these Pauls is Gus himself. And what these people are another subsect of this cult that believes that they all just need to kind of be unified. That when the whole thing was first found in the beginning of the first place, essentially everybody was just cutting off, one finger or one toe and just kind of trying to stay the same as everybody, trying to show their dedication to whatever religion this is, until eventually Borchardt and line would continue the go, chopping off full entire limbs and cutting off more toes and eyelids and tongues and ears, and pretty much Paul, the original, would want nothing to do with this. And he would slowly start accumulating everybody who's kind of too afraid in this cult into this giant mansion where everybody would become Paul. All these people with blonde hair, wearing the same exact clothes, they all kind of talk similar, and they won't really answer any questions that are, marked for an individual person, as they are a whole of just Pauls. And by the end of the story, Klein would kind of realize that he needs to work with these people, and he would also realize that these people are just going to kind of crucify him at the end to kind of complete whatever kind of premonition or prophecy that all these different Pauls think is going on. And at this point, we are really gunning through this thing, and I know it's probably getting confusing, but I just kind of want to convey to you people just how, interesting this book really is. It really gets down to it, and it really gets gritty, and by the end of this entire thing, I needed to watch something happy. Because what happens at the end is just crazy. But essentially, at the end, what all these Pauls would want is they would believe that Klein has been sent by God as, the flaming sword, to actually be the salvation and the person who would go on to create holy wrath against the Brotherhood of Amputation. And this is basically what would happen, as you would get about a 20-page section of essentially Klein going back through this main cult where he first started, and, killing literally everybody, one by one, in very gruesome ways, and eventually towards the end as well, you know, he does kill Portrait, he rips off his head, and he starts, you know, walking room to room. Each one of these different people is kind of sitting in their own little spot. He would set the head on the floor, pop the eyelids open, and make sure that these people could see just what he's done and what is going to happen to them. And by the end of this entire thing, essentially Klein would start to descend into madness, you know, after killing all these different people, and it starts getting very morally ambiguous, you might say. And while you might think, you know, it's hard to say that, you know, killing over 30 different people in this religious sector in this woods is, you know, obviously very wrong. These people did do a lot of wrong to Klein, and by the end of it, he just actually wants to feel bad about it, because he starts feeling like a mad dog. He just starts feeling the bloodlust. And by the time he gets to everything, and he's pretty much forced to go back to the Brotherhood of Pauls to kind of tell everything that's happened, and he has a sneaking suspicion that these people also, you know, just want to kill him by the end of this entire thing. The book would end with Klein running off into the wild, trying to escape everything and not even knowing what's going to happen next. And I believe that is how it ends, is, you know, Klein saying to himself, what next? It's very vague on whether or not Klein has essentially just lost his mind after all this bloodshed, after going through the initial trauma of having his arm cut off, and throughout the story, maybe even possibly being forced to have some other things cut off. I don't know, you're just gonna have to read it yourself. But overall, Brian Evenson's Last Days was something that I absolutely loved, and yeah, it's been a while since I've reviewed an actual book on this channel, so if I don't make entirely a lot of sense, it's just a bonus video, and hopefully it was somewhat interesting. And Last Days by Brian Evenson is definitely something that I highly recommend every one of you to read. If you're somebody who's a fan of horror, if you're somebody who's kind of into like a black comedy, things like The House That Jack Built, and while that movie is a lot more fucked up than what is portrayed in this book, I would say it's definitely something you should put on your list. Brian Evenson is a fantastic writer, and he's also very known for his short stories, and something that I'll be picking up soon. And yes, everybody, it felt very good to actually sit down and read an entire book. Essentially, a couple weekends ago, me and my girlfriend went to Chicago, and instead of sitting on my phone the entire time on the train ride, the 3-hour ride there from Michigan, I decided I was going to blow through this thing, and I did. I pretty much got through the entire book and finished it on the Sunday after that. And yes, it was a super enjoyable read, and something that I didn't even know was out there until I happened to stumble upon it across TikTok. So I guess thank you TikTok for that. But it's actually spawned a couple other books that I've been picking up. Like I said, there's one that I'm reading right now that, should be 2 separate books, but for some reason is 2 stories mashed together. It's a book called You've Lost a Lot of Blood, and while it did start kind of cool, it's kind of getting to a point where, it should have been 2 separate books. It's just rushing through, things are happening too fast, and it's not nearly done as well as Brian Evenson's writing. But yes, everybody, now I'm just rambling, and we're totally off topic. So hopefully you enjoyed this bonus video. I recently just moved my entire set, so let me know what you think of it down in the comments. I know it's not too entirely different, but I was hoping that we'd get a clearer image and that we'd have, less random things in the background and such. So definitely let me know what you think of that. And we'll be back to Conquer soon. I just haven't really had a ton of time to get that done, as well as, other things in life that I need to do. And, on top of wanting to actually get my comic videos done first. And yeah, just a lot going on. We'll be back on track pretty soon here. Videos might be late for a week or 2, but then, they'll start coming out. Things are gonna be late sometimes. I'm a pretty busy person. I work a full-time job. I think everybody knows that at this point, but I appreciate you all so much for being so patient, and everybody who's been coming here new to the channel. I do hope you enjoy. There's really been some awesome members of this community that I've really come to enjoy talking to and stuff in the comments, as well as other places and things like that. But yes, everybody, I'm gonna shut up now. I'm getting tired. But all of you, have an absolutely fantastic day. Definitely check out Last Days by Brian Evenson.